Chapter 1. The Moonlit Outcast. The forest was thick with mist, swirling like smoke from a forgotten fire. The air hung heavy, damp with the scent of earth and decay, the kind of smell that clung to the skin like regret. The last whispers of daylight were slipping through the branches, but the moon was rising, big and pale, crawling up the sky like it owned the damn place. It would rule the night, as it always did. Damien moved through it like a shadow, silent, patient. He knew this forest better than his own skin. The path beneath his feet was a mess of old roots and broken branches, but he never stumbled. He didn't need the light. His senses had sharpened over years of living in the dark, always on the edge, never fully trusting the world around him. The air shifted, a breeze stirring the mist, and his sharp eyes narrowed as he scanned the trees. It was the sound that caught him first. A rustle, something low and skittering, hiding in the underbrush. He wasn't the only predator tonight. Something else was lurking, just as hungry. He let the sound guide him, closing the distance between them. His steps were quiet, practiced. No snap of a twig, no rustle of leaves. His every movement was honed by the kind of instincts a man never should have, and still he couldn't help but feel the pull of it, that animal hunger gnawing at the edge of his mind, clawing at his control. It was always there, the beast. A companion he couldn't shake no matter how many times he tried. His face, angular and sharp like broken glass, was a canvas of scars, each one a reminder, the deep cut along his cheek, the nick on his jaw. The ones that didn't heal. He didn't remember when the scars had become a part of him. Maybe they'd always been there, underneath the surface. Maybe they were as much a part of him as the wolf that howled beneath his skin. "I walk alone," he thought, his voice as bitter as the taste of blood on his tongue. "The world I once knew is lost in the blood and darkness of my past. Can redemption ever be found for one who has become his own monster?" His breath caught for a moment. The forest, thick with fog, felt like a weight around him, pressing down, suffocating. The reminder of everything he'd left behind. The pack, the life he was born into, the rules he'd broken. The man he used to be had disappeared the night he left it all behind, the night he was cast out, and in his place there was just this. The outcast, the monster, roaming the woods like a ghost, looking for something to hold on to, but he didn't know what. Redemption? No, he had long stopped believing in that. All he had left was the hunt, and tonight the hunt was calling him just as it always did. But tonight something else was different. The moon. It was full, big and heavy in the sky, casting its cold light down on the world. Every time it rose like this he felt the pull, the change. The beast inside him stirred, waking up with the hunger of 1,000 years. Damien slowed his steps, his breath evening out as he moved deeper into the woods, his muscles tensed, his senses alive. He caught the faintest scent, something wild and unfamiliar tangling with the usual smells of the forest. His eyes flicked to the trees around him, narrowing as he scanned for movement. There it was again, a rustle, followed by a snap. Something big. A predator. Damien's lips twitched in a half-smile. He wasn't the only one stalking the night. The hunt was on. The forest around him felt alive. Alive with shadows, with threats. He could hear the small creatures, the rustling of leaves, the distant cries of owls. Everything was a whisper, a warning, a sign of something that would come for him in the dark. It had always been this way. He was always watching, always waiting. But tonight there was something more. Something gnawing at the back of his mind. Something he'd never felt before, a shift, almost like the world had tilted on its axis. The faintest sound broke through the silence. Footsteps, too soft to be human, too calculated to be an animal. A brush of fur against bark. His heartbeat quickened, the thrum of his blood loud in his ears. What the hell? he muttered under his breath, muscles coiling as he crouched low. His eyes flashed with an instinct older than time. He moved like water, fluid and silent, toward the sound. His wolf was waking up. The moon climbed higher, hanging in the sky like a silent judge, and Damien paused, listening. The air shifted again, colder now, thicker with the presence of something he couldn't quite place. But it was there, close, too close. His instincts flared. He was no longer alone. The mist swirled like it had a life of its own, thickening around him. And then there it was, a figure in the distance, moving through the fog, gliding just beyond the edge of his vision. His breath caught, a shadow, shifting like smoke, blending into the trees. Too fast, too quiet. "What the hell are you?" The question, low and dangerous, was whispered into the night, but the figure didn't answer. Instead it darted again, moving with the grace of something that wasn't quite human, something just as hunted as he was. Damien's pulse quickened. The chase had started. The night had settled deeper, the mist thickening around him like a wet blanket, suffocating the world. The moon was full now, a silver disk that hung in the sky like some kind of grim reminder. It bathed the trees in an eerie glow, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward him, clawing at the earth. A predator's world, a hunter's paradise. But tonight, something was different. There was a weight in the air, a tension that felt like the breath before a storm. Damien moved through the underbrush, each step silent, a ghost in the dark. His eyes were sharp, his senses attuned to every rustle, every break in the night's rhythm. And then he smelled it. Blood. The scent was faint at first, hidden beneath the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves, but it was there. Sharp, metallic, and fresh. It hit him like a slap, a gut punch to the senses. He slowed his pace, letting the scent guide him, pulling him deeper into the forest. He found it a few yards ahead, a deer, its legs caught in an old snare. The trap had done its work well. Blood pooled beneath the animal, staining the ground beneath it. It struggled weakly, its body trembling, eyes wide with panic. Damien stood still for a moment, his breath coming slow and steady. The wolf inside him stirred, that primal part of him that could smell weakness from miles away, that could taste the life of his prey before he ever laid a claw on it. But something else, something deeper whispered in the back of his mind. A voice that didn't belong, a memory of something better, something lost. He stepped closer, crouching down in front of the wounded animal, his movements slow and deliberate. His fingers brushed the trap, cold iron, jagged edges pressing against the deer's bloodied skin. The animal's eyes locked onto his, wide and filled with fear, but also something else, pleading, desperate. It wasn't just the pain that showed in its gaze. It was the helplessness, the same feeling Damien had carried with him for too long. His fingers twitched, a flicker of the beast rising inside him. The desire to end the creature's suffering, to make it quick, make it easy. But he hesitated. There was something in him that stopped, something he didn't recognize anymore. He could smell the fear, the blood. He could already taste the kill. But instead he knelt, his fingers working delicately to pry the trap open. His hands were rough, scarred from years of handling both weapon and bone, but tonight he wasn't the killer. Not yet, anyway. The deer's leg freed with a slight shift, and the animal stumbled back, breathing raggedly, trying to steady itself. Its legs buckled once, twice, before it stood again, shaking before it bolted into the forest. Damien watched it go, his breath deep and slow. His heart thudded in his chest, and he swallowed hard. Something wasn't right. He should have taken it, should have put it out of its misery, but instead he had let it go, for no reason he could name. "Maybe there's still something good left in me," he muttered to himself, his voice low, almost a growl. The words felt foreign, like they didn't belong in his mouth. He had done the right thing, the mercy, but the question gnawed at him. Was it mercy or weakness? Had he saved that deer, or had he just given it another chance to die by something worse than his hand? He didn't have the answer. He wasn't sure he ever would. In the distance, The howl of a wolf broke the silence, long and mournful, carrying across the trees like an ancient song. Then another, and another. The pack. It was a sound that raked at his insides, a reminder of the bloodline he'd left behind, of the rules, the code they followed. They didn't show mercy. They took, they killed. That was their way. Damien's lips twitched, a smile that wasn't a smile at all, a bitter, hollow expression. He could hear them, hear the pack calling out to one another, as if waiting for him to return, waiting for him to come back and be what he used to be. But he wasn't that man anymore, and he wasn't sure he ever could be. The world I once knew, he thought, staring into the blackness where the deer had disappeared. It's gone, and I'm just left with what's left of me. And what's left isn't enough. The wolves' calls echoed again, distant, but they carried with them the weight of old debts, of ancient rituals, their rules, their pack. They lived by the code, the law of the hunt. Damien had abandoned it all when he chose the lonely path, when he walked away from the pack, from the blood-soaked traditions that had shaped him, but it was there still, the pull, the call, the temptation to slip back into that world. His fingers tightened, a slow, controlled movement. He wasn't part of them anymore, not really. But every time the howls reached him, they reminded him of what he was, what he would always be. The monster. He exhaled, long and heavy, then stood up. He didn't turn back toward the pack's direction. He didn't need to. He had already made his choice. But the thought lingered, like the faint scent of blood in the air. Would he always be this, a broken thing wandering the forest, haunted by his past and the mercy he couldn't seem to leave behind? The answer didn't come. But as the night deepened and the forest swallowed the moon, Damien kept walking. The village was quiet at twilight, the kind of quiet that pressed down on the chest like a weight, thick with memories and secrets. The sun had sunk low, casting the sky in a burnished amber, the kind of colour that made the horizon look like it was bleeding into the sea. It wasn't a sight to stir anything more than a passing thought, not for the people who lived here. For Eleanor, though, it had been the kind of sunset that whispered of a different life. Before the curse, before the fear, before the wolf. Her feet brushed lightly against the cobblestones of the narrow street, the soft click of her boots against the ancient stones the only sound in the air. The walls of the houses rose up on either side, small stone cottages with ivy creeping along their edges, windows cracked open to let the evening air in. In the distance, the sea crashed against the rocks, a constant, timeless reminder of how little control anyone had over anything. Elena moved with the grace of someone who once had dreams, but had learned to live with the weight of those dreams slowly dying in her chest. She was young once. Her eyes had been filled with fire, her heart full of hope. There had been a time when the world had felt wide, and she had wanted nothing more than to hold it in her hands. She had imagined a life full of laughter, of love. But that was before the curse. She paused in front of a small, weathered door, her family's home, a place that should have been filled with warmth, but instead it was quiet, cold, a place where no one dared to speak the truth, where silence wrapped its fingers around every word. Elena's eyes flicked up to the moon, now rising, silver and heavy. It always felt like the moon watched her, judged her, as if it knew the darkness it had helped create inside her. She stepped inside, the door creaking softly as it closed behind her, sealing her off from the world. The smell of herbs and old wood filled her senses, a scent that should have comforted her, but only served to remind her of the life she had lost. Her mother's chair was empty, and the fire in the hearth had long since died out. "Mother?" Her voice broke the stillness, but there was no answer. She had been left to carry this burden alone, just as she had always feared she would. Her fingers tightened on the doorknob, her thoughts drifting back, back to when she had been different. Before the night everything had changed, back to when the curse had first taken root. It was a night much like this one. Calm, cool, the kind of evening that made the world feel still, like nothing could touch it. Elena had been with him then. He had been everything she had ever wanted, strong, kind, with eyes that made promises he couldn't keep. He had told her she was the one, that nothing would ever come between them, and she had believed him. But that night had been the start of everything. The betrayal had been swift, like a blade to the heart, and just as cutting. The full moon had been high in the sky, glowing like a harbinger of doom. Elena had felt it before she had seen it, felt the change stir deep in her bones, a call she couldn't ignore. A wolf's howl had echoed through the night, distant but unmistakable. But it wasn't a wolf. Not really. He had held her back, told her it wasn't safe. She had resisted, of course. She hadn't known then what the moon could do to a person. What it could do to her. The curse had claimed her body, her soul in one violent surge. Her skin had stretched and pulled, her bones cracked and reshaped, and in an instant she had become something else, a creature of fur, of fangs, of claws. A monster. It had been the pain that had broken her, the pain, and the realization that she had been changed forever, that he had known. That he had brought her to that place, that cursed moment for his own gain. His betrayal had been enough to send her spiraling into madness, but the curse had sealed her fate. The firelight flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the walls. Eleanor sank down onto the edge of the old wooden table, her fingers running over the smooth surface, the only thing left that still felt familiar. Her memories were like shards of glass, jagged and sharp, cutting into her thoughts. "I once dreamed of a love that transcends fear," she thought bitterly, her gaze drifting to the window, where the moon now hung, full and luminous. "I thought I could have it all. But now I'm cursed to wear this wolf's skin every full moon. Am I doomed to a life of endless isolation?" The words echoed in her mind, a mantra she had told herself 1,000 times but could never quite believe. She had spent so long fighting against the curse, trying to control it, but the truth was always there, waiting for her in the stillness, in the dark corners of her heart. Her life was split into two halves now, the one she had dreamed of, the one she had lost, and the one she had become, a monster. Every time the moon rose, she felt the beast inside her stir. It was a hunger that had no name, a fire that could not be quenched, and it always felt like it was growing, expanding, consuming her from the inside out. The wolf was stronger than ever, and it didn't care about Elena's humanity. It didn't care about her dreams, her hopes, or her past. It only cared about survival. And the worst part? Elena wasn't sure anymore if she cared either. She closed her eyes, letting the darkness of the room swallow her, and for a moment she let herself imagine a world where she could be free of it all. A world where she wasn't running from herself, where she didn't have to hide from what she was. But that world didn't exist. Not for her. Maybe, she thought, feeling the weight of the curse settle deeper in her chest, I was never meant for anything else. But the wolf wasn't all there was. There were still fragments of Elena, the woman she had once been, the woman she could be again. She could still feel the pull, the tiny flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. She turned her gaze back to the window. The moon was higher now, and the howls of wolves, real wolves this time, not the ones that lived inside her, carried on the wind, distant, foreign, but something in their cry tugged at her, a reminder of something long forgotten. The world had a way of reminding her of what she had lost. But somewhere deep in the silence, Elena knew there was something else waiting. Something, someone that could change everything. Maybe there was a chance. Maybe she could be more than just the monster. But first, She had to survive tonight. The forest was darker now, each tree a shadow, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and moss. Damien moved through it like a spectre, his boots silent against the ground, his eyes sharp, searching. There wasn't him to see. He could feel the world around him, the weight of it, the pull of the darkness. The wolf inside him was awake, prowling, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. The moon hung high, its light cutting through the trees, casting long, twisted shadows on the forest floor. It was full, a reminder, like everything else, that he couldn't escape what he was. No matter how far he ran, no matter how much he tried to bury the beast, it always came back, always clawed its way out of him. He stopped for a moment, just standing there, his breath coming slow and steady. The trees loomed over him like silent sentinels, watching, waiting for something. But for what? "You're a monster," he muttered under his breath, the words tasting like rust on his tongue. He had always known it, always felt it, like an itch in the back of his skull that no amount of scratching could fix. He could feel the wolf stirring within him, the primal hunger, the need to tear, to destroy. It wasn't a man's desire anymore, it was something older, something deeper. He clenched his fists, trying to keep the beast at bay, but the urge was there, creeping up his spine, gnawing at his insides. It was a hunger he couldn't ignore, a pull that made everything else fade into nothingness. But it wasn't just the hunger. It was the guilt, the weight of his past, every decision he had made that had led him here, every mistake, every betrayal, his pack, his family, his blood. It was all a mess of lies and broken promises. Damien's eyes narrowed as he stared into the distance. There were times when the world seemed so simple, just black and white, right and wrong, but not any more. Not for him. Now it was all shades of grey, and the darker side of him was the one that always won. Her room was dim, the only light coming from a single candle flickering weakly on the nightstand. It cast long shadows across the walls, painting them with the memories of a life she couldn't reclaim. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and dust, a smell that had once been comforting, but now only made her feel more isolated. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the silver locket in her palm. It was small, simple, but to her it was everything. The last reminder of a time before the curse. Before the betrayal. She could still remember the way it had felt, the warmth of the man who had given it to her, the way he had smiled at her, like nothing in the world mattered but the two of them. She had believed it then. She had believed in them. But that had been before. The curse had taken everything from her. It had twisted her into something she didn't recognize. Something that made her afraid of herself. Each full moon the transformation came, pulling her into the wolf's skin, stripping her of everything that made her human. Every time she was further away from the woman she had been. Every time she was further away from the love she had once dreamed of. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence swallow her. She clutched the locket tightly, as if holding onto it would somehow anchor her to the past. To the life she had lost. The moonlight filtered through the small window, casting a pale glow across the room, but it did nothing to ease the ache in her chest. "What am I supposed to do with this?" she thought bitterly. "How do I keep going, knowing I'll never be free of this curse?" The locket was a symbol of what she had lost. It was all that was left of the girl who had dared to dream. But that girl was gone now, replaced by something else. A woman trapped in a cycle she couldn't break. As Damien moved deeper into the forest, his mind began to wander. His body was tired, worn down from the constant battle inside him, but it wasn't just the physical strain that weighed on him. It was the gnawing sense of something missing, the pieces of his life that had slipped through his fingers, and the question that lingered in his mind. Was there anything left to fight for? The wolf howled in the distance, calling out to him, reminding him of what he was, what he had become. But there was something else, something faint, a shift in the air, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Damien stopped, his senses prickling, and for a moment he could almost hear something else, something softer but no less urgent. The faintest whisper of a call, distant but unmistakable. He shook it off, dismissing it as his mind playing tricks on him. There was no room for distractions, not out here, not in this place of shadows. Back in her room, Eleanor's hand slipped from the locket, her fingers brushing over the worn surface of the old wooden table. Her thoughts were racing, a constant cycle of fear and longing. She had tried everything, every potion, every incantation, every whispered prayer. But nothing had worked. The curse still gripped her, and she knew, deep down, that it always would. But tonight, as she sat there, the feeling was different. There was a pull in the air, a sense of something just out of reach. Her heart skipped a beat, she could feel it. A shift, a change, like the world was moving, changing, and she was caught in the current of something bigger than herself. Something that was waiting for her, even if she didn't know what it was, and for the first time in a long time, Elena didn't feel completely alone. Chapter 2. Crossroads of Doubt. The moon was a gleaming silver coin, too bright for the night, casting shadows that moved like liquid on the walls of Elena's small room. It hung heavy in the sky, waiting. She could feel it, the pull, the thrum deep in her bones. It had always been this way. Every month, the same damn cycle. The call of the moon, louder and louder as it climbed higher, more insistent as the night went on. She sat in the centre of her room, the candlelight flickering weakly in the corner, its flames trembling in the stillness. The air was thick, dense with the scent of fear, of anticipation. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her hands clenched tightly in her lap were ice-cold, numb from the pressure building inside her. Eleanor closed her eyes, tried to steady her breath, but it was impossible. The change had begun before she had even realized it. Subtle at first, a tension in her muscles, a pulse under her skin that felt too heavy, too foreign. It was the moon. She knew that now. It was the moon, and the beast inside her was waking up. Her body trembled as if it were at war with itself. The bones in her spine seemed to twist, stretch, crack, like they were fighting to break free of their human form. The skin felt tight, too tight, as though it didn't belong to her anymore. She could hear the shift in the air, the rhythm of her own heartbeat pounding louder in her ears, and the wild sound of her breath coming in shallow gasps. She squeezed her eyes shut harder, but it didn't help. She couldn't block it out. "I'm losing control." The words were trapped in her throat, half-formed, half-spoken, but they were the truth. Her hands, her human hands, pressed against the floor, her fingers clawing at the wood, desperate to hold on to something, anything, but the thing inside her wouldn't let go. It was there, growing stronger with every beat of her heart. Her chest constricted, and she gasped for air as her ribs ached, her bones trembling under the strain. What was happening? What had happened to her? She had never felt the change like this before. It wasn't just the usual battle between the human and the wolf. It was something more, something darker. She could feel the animal inside, gnashing its teeth, howling in her mind, wanting out. It was louder now. It was pushing against her skin, clawing its way through. Who am I when the beast awakens? The thought cut through the chaos, clear for an instant, but it was swallowed by the madness that was overtaking her. She wasn't sure any more. She wasn't sure what was real or what was the wolf. The woman who had been here, who had loved and dreamed, she was fading, like smoke in the wind. All that was left was the animal, the creature that had taken over every full moon, the thing that tore at her insides and left her wondering if she would ever be whole again. Her body arched violently, and the pain shot through her like lightning.
She screamed, no sound, just a raw, ragged cry that came from deep inside her. It was the kind of scream that came from the darkest parts of the soul, the parts you couldn't hide. The change ripped through her, tearing her apart, but it was worse this time. It was quicker. It was more violent. Her vision blurred as her senses sharpened, the air thickening with the scent of her own sweat and blood. She could smell everything now, the wood in the floorboards, the earth beneath the house, the faintest scent of the sea far off in the distance. And then there was the other scent, the one that had always haunted her dreams, the blood, the metallic tang of it thick and raw. The pain was unbearable. It was the kind of pain that turned you inside out, the kind that made you wish for an end that would never come. And then, as suddenly as it began, there was silence, stillness. Her body, twisted and writhing, froze. She looked down at her hands, now thickening, growing claws, sharp and black as the night. The transformation was complete. She stared at the beast she had become, the creature that now wore her skin. Her eyes, yellow, predatory, glowed in the dim light of the room. She was a wolf, and yet not. The human part of her was still there, buried beneath the savage hunger. The wolf looked back at her with cold, gleaming eyes. It was wild. It was free, but it wasn't hers. Elena's breath came fast, heavy in her chest. Her mind swam in confusion, the human thoughts tangled with the wolf's instincts. She could feel the pulse of her heart, the hunger building in her belly. The night was calling her. The wolf was calling her. What am I now? The question was a whisper in her mind, but it was a question that held no answer. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. She had lived with the curse for so long, had tried to fight it, to control it, but tonight was different. Tonight, it had felt like the beast was in control. Tonight, it had felt like she was losing herself to it, like she was nothing more than a prisoner in her own skin. And yet, as she stood there in the silence of her room, the wolf inside her breathing heavily, her mind turned towards something else. A flicker of something deeper, something calling to her, pulling her toward the outside world, pulling her toward the forest that stretched beyond her window. She didn't know why, but it felt important. It felt like fate, like something was waiting for her out there in the dark. The wolf shifted on her feet, eager, restless. The hunger was there, raw and insistent. But there was something else now, something new in her chest, something that made her hesitate, a flicker of hope. Or maybe it was just a lie she told herself. Maybe I'm not alone in this. The thought came unbidden, but it lingered, pulling her closer to the window, closer to the night outside. She didn't know what was waiting for her out there, but she knew she had to find out. And the wolf knew it too. The forest was still, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence.
It wasn't the kind of silence Elena had known before, the peaceful quiet of the village or the soft rustling of trees in a light breeze. This was different. This was the kind of silence that felt dangerous. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of the earth and something else, something darker. The moon hung high in the sky, its cold light filtering through the branches like a spotlight on a stage, waiting for the show to start. Elena's body still trembled from the aftershocks of the transformation. Her bones had twisted, reshaped, and still they ached, the muscles unfamiliar, stretched too far. She was caught between two worlds, the human one she could no longer touch, and the animal one that felt more real with each passing moment. Her hands, no, her claws, scratched at the rough bark of the trees, the sensation sharp, foreign. She could smell everything now. The damp moss underfoot, the musty scent of decaying leaves, the sharp tang of the air that seemed to pulse with power.
She could feel it too, the hunger. It gnawed at her insides, a hollow emptiness that couldn't be filled no matter how much she tore at the world around her. She needed to feed. She needed to run. She needed to be free of this skin that was never hers, but the wolf inside her was making the decisions now, and she was too weak to fight it. Her feet carried her deeper into the forest, without thought, without reason.
She was on autopilot, moving through the woods like some kind of creature of instinct, her mind a blur of confusion and chaos. The howl of wolves in the distance sent a thrill through her. But it wasn't just any howl. It was different this time. Closer, sharper, calling to her, like a whisper on the wind, beckoning her towards something she couldn't understand. And then she saw it. It was a clearing, untouched, a small patch of moonlight in the middle of the trees. But it wasn't the clearing that caught her attention. It was the presence, the figure standing at the edge, watching her. His eyes were narrowed, studying her every move like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Damien! The moment their eyes met, it was as if the entire world had frozen. Alena felt it before she could place it. A pull, like a current running through her veins, latching onto something deep inside her. It was instinctive, primal. He was part of the world she had never wanted to be part of, yet there he was, staring her down like a challenge. She could feel the wolf's instincts bubbling up to the surface, the fight for dominance in her own body, the urge to lunge, to claim. But there was something else there, something human, something terrified, buried deep under the wildness. Damien didn't. He just stood there, his dark eyes fixed on her, assessing, waiting. The air between them crackled with tension, electric and thick with unspoken words. She wanted to run, but her body— no, the wolf was telling her to stay. She didn't know why. She didn't know what this was, this connection she felt in her gut, but she couldn't shake it. A low growl rumbled from her chest, the sound escaping before she could stop it. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she fought to hold on to what little humanity she had left. She was nothing more than an animal now, a creature of the night, but a part of her was still Alena, still fighting to be heard, to be more than just the beast that lurked beneath the surface. Damien's lips twitched, a faint smile, or maybe it was a sneer, she couldn't tell. His body was taut, coiled, ready for whatever she was going to do next. He was a stranger, but he wasn't. Not really. She could feel the weight of the pack behind him, the code they lived by, the rules they followed. She had left that life behind. She had chosen to be something else. But tonight she wasn't so sure anymore. The faint howls echoed through the forest again, distant but unmistakable. The pack was out there, somewhere in the darkness, calling to him, calling to her. Damien's voice broke the silence, low and rough. "You shouldn't be here." The words cut through her like a blade. She knew what he meant. She could feel it, the tension in the air, the weight of his judgment. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to be anything but a danger, a mistake. That's what the pack would say. She wasn't part of this world anymore, and the sooner she understood that, the better. But the wolf inside her wasn't listening. She took a step toward him, her body moving of its own accord, the primal urge to confront, to dominate, to prove herself rising to the surface. Damien's eyes flashed, something dark and dangerous in them, but he didn't move, didn't make a sound. For a moment, all Eleanor could hear was the pounding of her own heart, the sound of it thrumming in her ears. She was close now, close enough to feel the heat of him, close enough to smell the scent of the forest on his skin, the musk of a man who had lived far from the safety of human walls. He was dangerous. But there was something else, too, something she couldn't quite place. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes flicking to the sky, to the full moon over. "You're not ready for this."
Elena's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't ready for anything. Not this, not him, not the chaos that swirled inside her. But she couldn't pull away. She couldn't stop herself. There was something about him, something that called to the beast within her, something that felt like destiny waiting to unfold. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until finally Elena backed away, unable to keep the battle raging inside her at bay any longer.
Her instincts screamed at her to run, to leave, to go anywhere but here, but a part of her knew she couldn't. Not now. "Stay out of my way," she said, her voice a rough growl, the wolf's voice more than her own. She turned and stalked off into the trees, but the connection, whatever it was, lingered like a shadow, trailing behind her. Damien didn't chase. He didn't have to. He knew what would happen next. They would collide again. Fate had seen to that. The moonlight sliced through the trees, pooling in pale pools on the forest floor, as if the night itself was watching them, waiting for something to break. The glade was empty, save for the two of them. The air felt thick, the kind of tension that stretched out just before a storm, as if the world was holding its breath. Damien stood on one side, his silhouette sharp against the dim glow. His eyes were trained on Alina, the weight of his past pressing down on him like the old scars he carried beneath his skin. She was a mess of contradictions, both human and beast, hope and despair tangled together in a single beautiful package. He could smell the wildness in her, the feral hunger, the urge to run, to fight. He could see it in her eyes, that raw, painful need to break free from whatever kept her chained to this world. But there was something else, too. Something softer. Something vulnerable.
Damien's jaw tightened. She was a complication he didn't need. The kind of complication that could pull him right back into a life he'd left behind. A life he hadn't thought about for years. Her presence, the way she stood there in front of him, torn between the wolf and the woman, made his head spin. His instincts screamed to run, to leave her in the wild where she belonged, but his heart? His heart was somewhere else. Somewhere he hadn't dared to look in a long time. Help her and risk exposure to my past? Abandon her and be forever haunted by my indifference?
The questions circled in his mind like a trap, tightening with every second that passed. He had never been good at making choices, not since he walked away from the pack. But this was different. She was different. Elena's gaze met his, and for a brief moment everything else faded. She stood there, her body half shifted, the wolf's wildness still clinging to her like a second skin. There was a fierceness in her that pulled at him, a reminder of everything he'd lost when he turned his back on the pack, on his own nature. Her breath was ragged, her body still trembling from the transformation. She looked like she wanted to tear something apart, but there was something else in her eyes too. A hesitation, a vulnerability that mirrored his own. I know the wild in me, but can I trust a monster when I see so much pain in his eyes? The thought flickered in her mind like a ghost, a reminder that she had been broken too. She had seen the kind of darkness that lived inside people and wolves. And yet she couldn't help but feel something tug at her when she looked at him. There was pain in his eyes, a rawness that mirrored the way she felt. She knew the feeling all too well, the weight of a past that wouldn't let go. A gust of wind rustled the leaves around them, and for a brief moment everything went still. The tension was palpable. The air between them was charged with 1,000 unspoken words, things neither of them were ready to say, not yet. She wanted to run, to flee, but her feet stayed rooted to the spot. He was a danger to her, she knew that. But there was something else. Something in the way his eyes tracked her movements, something in the way he waited for her next move. She shifted her weight, her claws flexing in the dirt. She couldn't move, couldn't think. Her body caught between the wolf's instincts and the human side of her that still clung to hope, to the idea that maybe, just maybe, there was something more to this. Damien's voice cut through the silence, low and steady. "You don't belong here." It was a warning, though it didn't sound like one. He was watching her closely now, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. She was wild, untamed, but there was something in her that made him hesitate, something that stopped him from seeing her as just another beast to be put down. Elena's voice was quiet, rough from the change, but she didn't back down. And yet here I am.
His eyes flicked over her once more, reading the subtle signs, the tremble of her stance, the way she held herself, half wolf, half human. "You're lost and I can't help you." The words hit her like a slap, a truth she didn't want to hear but knew deep down was real. She was lost. She had been lost for so long, she didn't know what it meant to be found anymore. She could feel it deep inside. This hunger, this emptiness. But it was more than just the need to feed. It was the need to belong.
To find someone who understood the chaos inside her, someone who could see beyond the wolf and see her. But she wasn't sure if she could trust him. She wasn't sure if he was capable of seeing past the monster. The air between them thickened, charged with 1,000 unsaid things. Damien stood, his posture tense, every muscle coiled like a spring, waiting for her to make the next move. His heart, that treacherous thing, was pounding in his chest. He shouldn't be here. He shouldn't be this close to her, to anyone. He had left that life behind for a reason. But then he thought about the way she looked at him, like she was waiting for him to make a decision, like somehow she knew what he was capable of, what he could be if he allowed himself. He wasn't sure if it was hope or desperation in her eyes, but it made him want to do something, anything, to reach out to her, to pull her out of the wildness before she was lost in it. Damien took a slow step forward, his instincts at war with his thoughts. She was dangerous, she was untamed, but she was also alive, more alive than anything he'd seen in a long time. His hand twitched at his side, the desire to help, to protect, almost overwhelming. He wasn't sure what it was about her, but there was a pull, a need, something that made him want to take her hand and run far away from this cursed existence, from the pack, from the blood, from everything. He stopped himself. His eyes locked with hers, and for a brief, charged moment neither of them moved. There was too much at stake, too much history between them, and nothing solid to hold on to. "Stay away from the pack," he said finally, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. It was a warning, but it was something more. It was the first time he had shown her a sliver of trust. Her gaze softened just a fraction, her lips barely moving. "I don't belong anywhere." Damien's heart thudded in his chest. Her words hit him harder than he'd expected. He hadn't realized how much he wanted to hear them, that someone else, someone as lost as he was, could feel the same way. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he extended a hand to her. A gesture that was both an offering and a risk. He had lived his life in shadows, cutting ties with everything he had once known, but this was different. Something inside him shifted, something old and buried, but still very much alive. His voice was low, rough around the edges. "I'll help you, but you have to trust me." The wind picked up again, rustling through the trees, and for a moment Elena didn't move. She stared at his outstretched hand like it was the edge of a cliff, and every part of her wanted to step back. Every part of her wanted to run. But she stayed, just for a moment longer than she should. Finally she reached out, her hand trembling, but not from fear, from something else, something unfamiliar. Their fingers brushed, and the world shifted. The night felt different now, warmer, even though the air was cold. Chapter 3. The First Steps Together. The first light of dawn trickled through the trees, weak and hesitant at first, like it didn't want to break the spell of the night. The forest still held on to the darkness like a secret it wasn't ready to let go of. The air thick with the kind of silence that had a taste, a weight. The sky above, bruised purple with the remnants of the night, began to give way to soft amber, the light seeping in through the leaves, making the world look like something new, something that had never been touched. Damien's boots crunched softly on the forest floor as he moved, his eyes scanning the horizon, his senses still on edge. The night had been rough, the tension between them hanging like a thick fog that wouldn't lift, but it had lifted, at least for now.
Elena, still partially reverted to her human form, stumbled beside him. Her movements unsteady, like a newborn foal trying to find its legs. Her eyes were unfocused, the world still spinning around her as her body fought to hold on to what was human, while the wolf inside her clawed at the edges. She was too quiet, too still, but the tremors in her limbs spoke volumes. There was nothing graceful about the way she moved now.
She was broken, a fractured thing caught between two worlds, and he couldn't decide if he was here to help or to simply witness the inevitable. Still, she was alive, and that was something. Damien's gaze flicked to her as she struggled to keep her footing, the glow of the first light catching the mess of wild hair tangled around her face. She looked younger, somehow, more vulnerable, as if the weight of the night had drained the strength from her bones. leaving nothing behind but the remnants of the woman she'd been before all of this. Her eyes hold both hope and sorrow. The thought rolled through his mind, cutting through the fog of his own confusion.
He wasn't sure why he was still walking with her, why he hadn't left her there to fend for herself, but something in her, something in the way she carried herself, even now, pulled at him. She was broken, like him, but there was something about her that didn't make him want to turn away. Maybe he didn't want to turn away because he could still see the ghost of the woman she'd been before the wolf had claimed her.
And maybe, just maybe, she could help him put his own soul back together. "Take it slow," Damien said, his voice low, a little too rough, the way it always was when he spoke. "We're almost out of the woods." Elena nodded, though he wasn't sure if she'd heard him. Her gaze was far away, unfocused, as if she were seeing something he couldn't. But that wasn't unusual for her, was it? She'd been seeing things for as long as she could remember, only they were things no one else could see, things inside her, things she didn't want to be true. As they walked, the forest slowly began to loosen its grip, the trees thinning, the air growing lighter. They moved through the woods, past the shadows and the danger, toward something else, something that felt just out of reach, but still closer than either of them wanted it to be. Could she be the key to mending my broken soul? The thought slipped through his mind like a ghost, a fleeting thing, but one that hung there nonetheless. He'd lived too long with the scars of his past, the weight of everything he'd done and everything he hadn't. It wasn't just the pack, it wasn't just the betrayals, it was everything. Every step he had taken that had led him here, to this moment, to her. And yet there was something about the way she moved through this world, broken and wild, that made him think she could piece him back together.
Or maybe it was just wishful thinking, just another illusion in a world full of them. But even the illusion felt real. Elena took a shaky breath beside him, the air leaving her lungs in a soft exhale. She didn't say anything, but he could feel her watching him from the corner of her eye. In his presence, I sensed not just the beast, but a man burdened with regrets. Perhaps he too deserves a second chance.
Her voice, quiet and unsure, danced in her mind. It was a thought she hadn't spoken out loud, but had felt the moment their paths crossed. She hadn't known what to think of him, hadn't known whether to trust him, but some invisible force had drawn her in. She could see the darkness in him, the way it clung to him, the way it made him move, the way it kept him apart from the world. But there was something else there, too. She could see it in the way he moved, protective, hesitant. She had been alone for so long, a ghost drifting from one place to the next, that even the hint of companionship felt like something worth fighting for. Maybe they both deserved that second chance. They reached the edge of the forest just as the first rays of sunlight cut through the trees, casting the world in sharp relief. The town, distant but real, lay just beyond the tree line, just far enough away that they could slip in unnoticed. The thought hit her like a shot. She wasn't ready for what lay beyond the trees, not yet. She didn't know what she was walking into, or what she had just walked away from. Damien stopped for a moment, his gaze flicking over her, before he looked back at the path ahead. "We'll find somewhere safe for you to rest. You need to—" "I'm fine," she interrupted, her voice steadier than it had been all night. She could feel it now, the pull of her humanity starting to reclaim itself, pushing the wolf down, pushing the pain back just enough to function, but not enough to forget. "I'm not some animal you have to babysit." Her words came out rough, like she was trying to convince herself more than him. Damien didn't respond, but the slight tightening of his jaw told her that, for the first time since they met, she'd gotten under his skin. He wanted to say something, maybe to argue, to tell her that she wasn't fine, that she wasn't alone in this. But instead, he just gave a brief nod and continued walking. Neither of them spoke for a while, the only sound the crunch of their footsteps on the dry leaves beneath them. As they walked, the tension between them slowly started to shift. Quietly, imperceptibly, but it was there. It was the kind of shift that came with time, with shared silence, with the knowledge that, for the first time in what felt like forever, they weren't alone in this world. Both of them had been lost, but here they were, two broken souls walking together for no reason other than a simple need to move forward. And forward was all they had. The road was dirt, the kind that gripped at the soles of boots like it knew how to hold a man down. The village wasn't far, just a few miles from where the trees began to thin, where the shadows of the forest started to slip away and let the light in. The farther they walked, the less the air smelled like moss and blood, and more like dust and old wood. The world seemed smaller here, tighter, like the earth itself was trying to hem them in. Damien didn't say much as they moved through the countryside, just kept his gaze on the horizon, his boots crunching against the rough path. Elena stayed close, her body still working out the aftermath of her transformation. She walked with a little more steadiness now, though her eyes were always darting, always watching. She wasn't used to the peace of the day, not after a night spent fighting the wolf inside her. There was a part of her that wanted to ask questions, wanted to know where the hell they were headed, but she didn't. There was a silence between them that didn't need to be broken. Damien wasn't much for talking, but she could feel the weight of his thoughts, heavy like the air before a storm. She wasn't sure if they were heading towards safety or just deeper into the kind of trouble that never went away. But at least she wasn't alone. As the road stretched on, the trees gave way to small fields, the pale green grass bending in the wind, and then the village came into view. Nothing grand, just a handful of cottages nestled into the hillside, smoke curling out of chimneys like lazy tendrils. A few stray dogs wandered the road, sniffing at the earth, their tails wagging with the kind of indifference that only came from knowing the world had no real surprises left. Damien's pace didn't slow as they neared the village, but Eleanor could feel the shift in the air. The village wasn't just a place. It was a marker. It was a boundary they were crossing. They had been running, hiding in the shadows, but here they were exposed. The villagers were already watching them. A few old women standing by the well, their hands on their hips, eyes sharp under the weight of years and untold stories. They didn't say anything at first, just watched. Eyes flicking between Elena and Damien, as if weighing the cost of saying the wrong thing. Damien didn't seem to care. He had lived on the edge of the world long enough to know when to ignore the prying eyes, when to let the silence sit heavy between them. But Elena, she could feel the weight of it, the sting of being different, the danger in being known. As they passed the market, a man with a thick black beard gave them a hard look, but his hands were steady as he cut fruit with a sharp knife, and the blade gleamed under the sun as he worked, cutting slices like he was carving out pieces of their future.
"We should talk to the elder," Damien said, breaking the silence between them. He didn't look at her as he said it. Didn't need to. He was already ahead of her, walking toward the stone building at the far end of the village, a place that looked like it had stood since the earth was young, a place that whispered of things old and forgotten. Elena followed, her steps hesitant, not sure what kind of reception they'd get here. She'd heard the stories, heard the rumors that ran through villages like quicksilver.
People talked when they had too much time on their hands, when the silence in their lives was too thick to swallow. The door to the elder's house was a faded blue, chipped at the edges, but solid. It didn't creak when Damien knocked, just a heavy, solid thud, followed by a long pause, the kind that made her spine stiffen. The door opened slowly. An old woman stood in the doorway, her back straight despite the weight of years that bent her shoulders. Her eyes, dark as the night, flicked between the two of them. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She knew. "You've come for answers," she said, her voice rough, as if it hadn't been used in years. "But be careful, child." She looked at Elena, her gaze piercing. "Some answers bring more questions than you're ready to ask." Damien didn't flinch. He didn't need to. He'd been dealing with this kind of thing for as long as he could remember. He'd lived in the shadows, walking between the worlds that others couldn't see, had learned how to fight the weight of the unseen before anyone had taught him how. "We need help," he said, and it was as blunt as anything he'd ever said. There was no preamble, no beating around the bush. He wasn't here to waste time. The elder stepped aside, pulling the door wide enough for them to enter. Inside, the air smelled like herbs and smoke, like old things. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting long shadows along the walls. On the far side of the room, an old man was bent over a table, mixing something in a bowl, his hands moving with slow precision. "Ah, the lost ones," the elder said, her voice a quiet whisper now. "You seek what has been hidden, but be warned, the truth is a heavy burden to carry." Damien didn't answer. He knew what the elder meant. He had already carried enough weight to crush a lesser man, and he didn't need any more warnings. But Elena, she had never been part of this world, never understood the way it worked. She was still too fresh, too new to all of it. The elder turned toward Elena, her gaze narrowing. "You carry the curse," she said, the words soft but clear, like a stone dropped into still water. Elena's breath caught in her chest. "How do you know?" Her voice was rough from the transformation, but it held something else now, a curiosity mixed with the sharp edge of fear. The elder smiled slightly, her lips curving in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "The wolf never forgets. It marks the soul, even when the body is human." She turned, motioning to the old man by the table. "There are those among us who remember the old ways, the ones who understand what you're going through." The old man, who hadn't said a word, now raised his head and met Elena's gaze. His eyes were pale, almost white, and his face was carved with the lines of a lifetime spent in the shadows. "The curse you bear is old," he said, his voice low, like gravel grinding underfoot. "It's in the blood, and blood is a powerful thing. Don't think for a second it will let you go easy." Elena's pulse quickened. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about understanding the monster inside her, the creature she had tried so long to control, to outrun. The weight of the truth pressed against her chest, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was walking alone. The fog rolled in thick, heavy like a blanket you couldn't shake off. It clung to the earth, wrapping around the trees and the roof of the old cottage at the edge of the village. You could have missed it if you weren't looking for it. Just another tangle of ivy and rotting wood, half swallowed by the earth and the trees, tucked in a corner like a secret, a place that looked like it had been forgotten even by the gods who made it. The door creaked when Damien knocked, a sound that seemed to echo through the silence of the mist. A moment passed before the door opened, and the scent hit him. Incense, burning herbs, something sharp and bitter that made his skin prickle. The woman who stood in the doorway was old, her skin wrinkled, but her eyes, those eyes, were sharp, too sharp for someone her age. They cut through the fog like she could see right into him, into both of them. "You've come for answers," she said, her voice low, rough, like it had been scraped raw over the years. There was no question in her tone, just the certainty of someone who had seen too much. Damien didn't answer, just stepped inside, and Elena followed him, her movements still stiff from the strain of the transformation, like her body hadn't quite caught up to the change. The cottage was cramped, filled with relics, old scrolls, jars of herbs, and bones hanging from the walls. Candlelight flickered, casting long shadows that danced on the walls like something alive.
It was a place of secrets, a place where the past lived on and refused to die. The mystic's eyes narrowed as she studied them. "The curse that binds her soul is tied to the blood of those long forsaken," she said, her voice even lower now, as if she was speaking to herself more than to them. Her gaze flicked between Elena and Damien, like she was piecing together a puzzle that was too old, too tangled for anyone to understand. "And perhaps," she continued, her tone softening just slightly, "in his pain lies the cure." Damien's stomach tightened, his hand instinctively going to the scar across his jaw. His past was never far behind him, always hanging over him like a shadow. His sins, the things he had done, they were part of him, stitched into his skin. But the thought that they could be the key to Elena's salvation, that thought was too much to swallow. Could my past sins be the price for redemption, he thought, but the words didn't feel like his own. They felt like a question he had been asking himself for years, a question that never had an answer. He stood there silent, not trusting himself to speak, not trusting the flood of memories that threatened to break through. Instead, he just nodded, acknowledging her words, but not sure if he believed them. Elena shifted beside him, feeling the weight of the moment. She had heard the mystic's words, felt their meaning, but they were like something out of a dream, a riddle that didn't make sense, that couldn't make sense. She was cursed, that much she knew. But what was he to do with it? She glanced at Damien, his face unreadable, the past hidden in his eyes. The mystic moved deeper into the cottage, her eyes never leaving them. The curse is old, she said, and it's tied to blood, to power, to things that were never meant to be. But you, she pointed at Damien, her finger trembling slightly, you are connected to it, whether you want to be or not. There is power in the blood, and the blood calls to the blood. She paused as if considering something. You may not be the answer, but you're part of it, and there's nothing more dangerous than that. The mystic gestured for them to sit, and they did, taking the old wooden chairs that creaked beneath their weight. The fire crackled in the hearth, the only warmth in the room as the mist outside thickened, pressing against the windows like it wanted to be inside. You know, she said, her voice softer now, as if the weight of her words had settled in. Werewolves are not just beasts. They never were. They are bound by the laws of the pack, bound by ritual, the hunt. The hunt is sacred. The bond between pack members is sacred. Her gaze hardened as she looked at Damien. And when you left, you broke that bond. You broke the sacred rule. And that is why you are here now. Damien's jaw clenched, but he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The mystic knew more about him than he liked, and the weight of the truth was heavier than anything he could deny. The pack has its own laws, the mystic continued, leaning forward. You think you can outrun them, but you can't. The pack will always pull you back, whether you're ready for it or not. The hunt calls to you. The moon calls to you. It's in your blood, and if you turn away from it, you will always be broken. Damien stared into the fire, the flickering light casting shadows on his face. I left my pack to escape the cruelty of tradition, yet here I stand, defined by the very customs I despise. The thought curled inside his chest, a reminder of the cost of his freedom, the price of his independence. It wasn't just the pack he had abandoned. It was everything he had ever known, everything that had shaped him. And yet here he was, stuck between worlds, caught between the monster and the man. The mystic's eyes didn't leave him. The pack has a code, a way of life. They have honor. And when you break the code, when you betray the pack, the consequences are severe. But there are rituals that can bind you back and rituals that can tear you apart. She paused, her eyes flicking to Elena, who was sitting in silence, watching them both. But there is no easy way out for either of you. Elena's breath caught in her throat. What does that mean? Her voice was sharp, low, almost a growl. What does it mean for me? The mystic smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It means you can never truly escape it. The wolf will always be with you, and if you think it can be tamed, you're wrong. You can't change what you are. The question is, will you learn to control it, or will it control you? Damien's eyes flicked to Elena, and for a moment he wasn't sure what he saw there. Fear, confusion, and something else. Maybe it was hope, buried deep, like a fire trying to burn beneath the ash, but it wasn't enough to warm them both. What do we do? Elena asked, her voice quieter now, the weight of the truth pressing down on her. The mystic didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at both of them, her eyes narrowing as if searching for something. You must choose. The pack will come for you, and when they do, you will have to decide where you stand. Do you go back to them, or do you walk away, knowing the cost? The room fell silent, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Damien felt the weight of the decision settle like a stone in his chest. The past was coming for him, like it always did, and there was nowhere to hide. The day started with a mist, the kind that clung to the world like a secret, thickening as it rose from the earth. The forest was quiet beneath the blanket of fog, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. Damien moved through it like a shadow, his every step slow and deliberate, the way someone used to walking in silence, moved when the world wouldn't give them a moment of peace. Elena followed a few paces behind him, her steps uncertain but gaining confidence with every breath. They had been at this for days, traveling through the woods, learning what they could about the curse, about the rituals, about the way the world had worked long before either of them had stumbled into it. The sunlight filtered through the trees in jagged lines, a reminder of what was out of reach. They stopped at the stone circle first, the ancient rocks towering over them, weathered and worn by time but still standing, stubborn as if they had something to prove. The circle had been there for longer than either of them could understand, a remnant of an older world, one that Elena wasn't sure she could trust, but had no choice but to learn from. Damien, of course, knew the significance. He'd been part of it once. Damien was already kneeling by one of the stones, his hands moving over the surface like he was searching for something hidden beneath, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He had been here before, countless times, in a different life, and it showed in the way he handled the rituals, with quiet precision. The ritualistic incantations rolled off his tongue, smooth and practiced, though there was a hardness to his voice that made Elena wonder what he wasn't saying. She stood a few feet away, watching him for a long moment before she finally moved to his side. She tried to mimic his stance, though she felt clumsy and unsure. Her hands shook slightly, the power of the curse still too close, too fresh, too raw inside her. It was harder than she thought, this business of trying to regain control, of keeping the beast from breaking free every time she so much as breathed. Why does this feel like I'm reaching for something I'll never have? Elena's thoughts whispered. But she pushed them aside and tried to focus on the words Damien had spoken, the ones he had taught her in silence, the ones that had started to make sense in the quiet of the woods. There was a rustling behind her. She turned sharply, her heart quickening, but it was just a breeze moving through the leaves. She hadn't realized how on edge she still was, how the threat of the beast inside her lingered just under the surface. Damien glanced at her, his eyes sharp but softer than they had been before. You need to center yourself. Feel the earth beneath you. If you're not grounded, you won't get anything. Elena gritted her teeth but nodded. Center myself? It sounded easier than it felt. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to feel the weight of the earth, the cool dirt under her feet, the ancient stone beneath her hands. But all she could think about was the ache in her body, the hunger that crept at the edges of her consciousness, clawing for release. I can't do this, she muttered under her breath, barely loud enough for him to hear. You can, Damien said, his voice low and steady, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. He stood, brushing the dirt from his knees, and came to stand beside her. He didn't touch her. He never did. But there was a presence about him that she couldn't ignore. There was a pause before he spoke again, his voice softer this time, as if the weight of his words were more honest than they had been before. We've all got our demons, Elena. It's just a matter of making peace with them. That's all this is. Making peace with what you've become. Elena's stomach twisted at his words, but she knew he wasn't wrong. He never lied to her, even when it felt like the truth was a little too much to handle. She nodded, though her insides twisted into knots. She wasn't sure how to make peace with what she'd become. She wasn't sure she ever would. But the quiet in his voice, the steady assurance he didn't always show, made her want to try. After a while, they left the stone circle and followed the path through the trees to a misty riverbank. The current was slow, lazy, winding its way around stones as old as the world, and the silence felt more real here. Elena sat on a rock by the water's edge while Damien gathered herbs. Things she couldn't name, things that smelled sharp and earthbound. She watched him, her eyes drifting from his movements to the trees behind him, the way the fog seemed to cling to the river, wrapping around the water like some forgotten memory. The quiet stretched between them, thick and comfortable. She could feel it now, the growing trust, the way their silences weren't awkward anymore. He had a way of being in the world that didn't feel like a threat, even when she knew what he was. "You don't talk much," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She had been wondering about it for days, the silence between them, the way he held everything so tightly inside himself. Damien paused, glancing at her but not really looking. He didn't answer immediately, like he was thinking, weighing his response before giving it. "There's not much to say. Doesn't seem that way to me," she replied, her voice soft, half smiling. "Seems like there's a lot you keep to yourself." He shrugged, as if that wasn't something worth mentioning. "Not everything needs to be said." She wanted to argue, to tell him that the silence wasn't enough, that there were things they needed to talk about, but she didn't. Not now. The air between them was changing, and she could feel it. A slight shift, a new understanding between them. Damien finished gathering the herbs and walked back toward her, sitting down on the moss beside her. He held out a small bundle of leaves, the sharp smell filling the air. "We need to prepare for tonight. You're going to need more strength." She took the herbs from him, studying them, trying to remember everything he had taught her about the plants, about the magic, about the way things were meant to work in the world that seemed to never quite fit her. Will it work? Her voice was quieter now, softer, as if she was asking more than just about the herbs. Damien didn't look at her. He stared out across the river, his eyes distant, lost in something far away. "I don't know," he said finally, "but it's the only shot we've got." Many thoughts came from the surrounding trees in shadowy outlines, making the night feel more like a dream than reality. The world around them was nothing but darkness and whispers, the sounds of the forest muted by the steady hum of the flames. The air was cool but not cold, the kind of chill that felt good against the skin after a long, hot day. Everything around them was still, except for the flickering of the fire, the only real movement in the world that felt alive. Damien sat with his back against a tree, arms crossed, his eyes watching the flames like they held answers to questions he had stopped asking years ago. Elena sat across from him, her legs drawn up to her chest, staring into the fire with a kind of quiet intensity that made the air between them thicken. The silence wasn't the same as before. It wasn't awkward. It was charged, like the night had swallowed all the words and left only the things that mattered. Elena had learned not to speak too much. Words had a way of slipping out, getting tangled in places they didn't belong. But tonight there was something different. Something inside her she couldn't hold back anymore. She broke the silence first, her voice rough from the day's strain, but softer than she intended. "You ever wonder if we're just mistakes?" Her gaze was fixed on the fire, but she didn't really see it. If everything we've done, if it's all just leading us towards something we can't escape. Damien didn't answer right away. He had the same question in his mind, but he wasn't sure how to put it into words. His past had been one long string of mistakes, decisions made in the heat of anger, choices he'd paid for with the years he'd spent running. He shifted slightly, his eyes flicking to her for a moment before returning to the flames. "The pack," he hesitated, as if the word tasted like something foul in his mouth. He didn't like to talk about it, not with anyone. The pack had always been a weight, a chain that pulled him in 100 different directions. It wasn't just the blood or the rules. It was the guilt. It was the cost of leaving. "It's not the pack, it's what they represent," he said finally, his voice rough, like it had been unused for too long. "I left because I couldn't stand the blood, the politics, the lies. I thought I could outrun it, thought I could be different. But it's always there in the back of your mind, the thing you can't escape, the thing that defines you." His gaze hardened, his jaw tightening. He wasn't looking at her anymore, wasn't looking at anything, the fire, the trees, the silence. It all felt too close, too suffocating. You think you can leave something behind, he continued, his voice quieter, as if he were speaking more to himself than to her. But the pack, your blood, they don't just let go, not like that. The moment you leave, they own you even more. Elena listened, her eyes still on the fire. She understood that more than she wanted to. She had thought she could outrun the wolf inside her, that she could control it. But every time the moon rose, every time the beast clawed its way to the surface, she was reminded that she was wrong. She was still trapped by the thing she hated the most. She exhaled slowly, the weight of her thoughts pressing against her chest like a stone. "I get it," she said softly. "It's never really gone, is it? The past, the curse. It doesn't just fade, it haunts you. You think you can ignore it, bury it under the weight of your choices, but it's always there." The words hung between them, heavy and raw. For a moment, neither of them moved. The fire crackled again, a soft, steady rhythm in the quiet. Finally, Elena looked up at him, her gaze a little more vulnerable now. "I've been trying to fight it, to keep it from swallowing me whole, but I don't know if I can anymore." She looked at the fire again, as if it held the answers she was too afraid to ask out loud. Damien didn't answer right away. His eyes flickered to her, reading the way her shoulders slumped, the way her hands clenched tightly around her knees. There was a softness to her now, something he hadn't seen before. A crack in the armor she kept so tightly wound around herself. It was like she was looking for something, someone, to help her make sense of it all. "I don't know if we're just mistakes," he said, his voice low but certain. "But I do know this. We're both still here, and that counts for something." His words settled into the space between them, and for the first time in what felt like a long while, there was a quiet peace in the air. They were broken, but they were still standing, and maybe that was all that mattered. Elena turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze. It was raw, real, unguarded. There was a vulnerability there, something she had tried to bury but couldn't anymore. She didn't know how or why, but in that moment, with the fire flickering between them, she felt it. A connection, fragile and quiet, but real. Damien felt it too. He didn't understand it. Hell, he didn't even know how to react to it, but the pull, the tension between them, it was there, undeniable, like the weight of the world shifting around them. After a beat, Elena managed a small smile, though it was tinged with sorrow. "I don't know if we can fix this," she said softly, "but I think we should try." Damien's lips twitched, the first hint of a smile breaking through the mask he had built so carefully. He leaned back against the tree, exhaling slowly as he let the tension in his body unwind, just a little. "Yeah," he muttered almost to himself. "I think we should." They sat there in the silence, the warmth of the fire between them, the weight of the night pressing down around them. There were no easy answers, no guarantees. But for the first time in a long time, they weren't alone in their brokenness. And that felt like something worth fighting for.
Chapter 4. The Calm Before the Storm. The clearing was untouched, a slice of forgotten land hidden deep in the forest. Ancient stone circles lined its edges, each etched with symbols so old they seemed to hum with the weight of the earth's memory. The air was thick with something more than just the scent of moss and damp leaves. It was the weight of something sacred, something powerful, something that had waited for centuries to be uncovered. Eleanor stood in the center, her hands raised toward the sky, eyes closed. Her breath was slow, measured as she focused on the incantation, on the rhythm of the world that had long been lost to her. The moon was high, silver and full, casting its cold light over the stones. It wasn't the same moon that had claimed her. This one felt different, calm, steady, offering something that felt just out of reach but close enough to taste. Damien watched her from the edge of the clearing, his eyes sharp, his body tense, ready for the slightest movement. He had helped her prepare, guided her through the motions, but the ritual was hers to control. It always had been. He couldn't help her beyond this point. This was her fight, her battle to win. The thought pressed against his chest, heavy and uncomfortable. For a moment he forgot to breathe, his focus solely on her. The way her body seemed to vibrate with energy. The way the air around her shimmered as if the very earth was bending to her will. Then, a change, a subtle shift in the air. Eleanor's breath caught, a quick gasp that echoed in the stillness. Her body, still trembling from the strain of the transformation, seemed to steady itself. The wolf inside her, the thing that had been clawing at the edges of her mind, began to pull back, retreating into the corners of her consciousness like a shadow fleeing the light. The change was subtle, but it was there. Eleanor could feel it, the power of the ritual, the flow of magic wrapping around her, holding her together when she had always been close to falling apart. She could almost hear it, the wolf's frantic pacing slowing, its snarls dimming in the back of her mind. For a few breathless moments she stood there, caught between two worlds, the human and the beast. The ground beneath her feet felt solid, real. For the first time in so long, the curse seemed weak, like it had finally loosened its grip. The wolf wasn't gone, but it was distant, its power drained, its presence muted. For just one moment I am free, Elena thought, the weight of her own breath caught in her throat. This could be our chance. This is it. Her body, still aching, still scarred by the transformation, felt lighter. The beast inside her was nothing more than a faint whisper now, drowned by the magic of the stones, by the quiet strength of the ritual. This was her chance to be free, free from the curse, from the constant war inside her. It was a fragile victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Damien stepped forward, his movements slow, as if he didn't want to break the spell that held the moment together. His eyes met hers, and for a brief second the weight of the world didn't seem so heavy. There was something in her gaze, something soft, something he hadn't expected to see. Hope. It made his chest tighten. Perhaps my past isn't entirely wasted if I can help her break these chains. The thought lingered in his mind as he watched her, and for a moment he dared to believe that he could be part of something larger than his own regrets, that maybe, just maybe, he could help her, help them both. But the moment didn't last. It couldn't, because the world had a way of reminding them who they were. The sound came first, a low rumble that shook the air, like the earth itself had grown impatient. The hair on the back of Damien's neck stood on end, his eyes flicked toward the trees, instinctively reaching for the weapon at his side. But it wasn't needed. The pack was here, and their presence was felt before it was seen. The first one emerged from the shadows, a hulking figure, eyes glowing with an unnatural light, teeth bared in a snarl. The others followed, emerging like wolves from the dark corners of the forest, their bodies half-shifted, claws digging into the earth. They moved with the precision of a predator's pack, coordinated and dangerous. Damien's hand went to the hilt of his knife, but he didn't draw it yet. He didn't have to. He knew who they were. He knew their scent, their presence. They were loyal to the old ways, the rules he had abandoned, the pack he had betrayed, and they had come for him. But it wasn't just him they were after. The first one growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You've made a mistake, outsider," he said, his voice like gravel. "You've been playing with forces you don't understand. And now you've brought the wolf back." Damien's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to Elena. She was still standing in the center of the clearing, her breath coming quick, her body tense. She knew. She could feel the danger. The wolf inside her was waking again, clawing at the edges of her mind, rattling against the cage of her control. Eleanor's heart raced. She didn't know what to do, didn't know where to run. The pack was here, the very ones who had created the curse that haunted her every night. And now they were here to finish what they had started. The fear she'd buried deep inside her started to surface again, threatening to overtake her. She glanced at Damien, his eyes locked on hers. He didn't need to speak. She could see it in his face, the same fear, the same recognition of what was coming. The pack had arrived to remind him of his past, to remind them both of the price they would pay for crossing them. The wolves charged. The first was on Damien in an instant, a blur of fangs and claws, a predator's hunger in its eyes. The clash of fangs and claws split the night, the air thick with the sound of battle. Damien fought back, his movements swift, practiced, but his mind was elsewhere. The wolf's eyes, glowing and wild, were a reminder of the life he had left behind, of the betrayal he had committed. "They've come to remind me of who I was, an outcast, a traitor." Elena's breath caught in her throat. The fear, the shock of betrayal, hit her like a tidal wave. She could see the chaos, hear the snarls and growls, but the beast inside her, the wolf, was starting to take over again. It could feel the fight, the blood, the violence in the air. It wanted to join the fray. It wanted to rip and tear. Her hands shook as she fought to control it. She couldn't lose herself again. Not now, not when they were so close. But the wolf was there, clawing, begging for release. "Damien," she thought, her mind screaming. "Don't let them take him." She tried to move, to help, but her body was already shifting, the wolf inside her too strong, too hungry. The curse was rising again, threatening to consume her. But the desperation in her chest pushed her forward, the image of Damien, of him fighting for them both, pushing her to control the beast. Her eyes locked on Damien's, and for the briefest moment she saw something in him. It wasn't just the fight, it was the connection, the bond they shared, fragile but real. She wasn't alone in this anymore. The battle raged on around them, but in that moment they both knew one thing. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The cabin was old, older than most memories, and it smelled like the kind of wood that had spent too many years standing still, waiting for something to happen. The floorboards creaked with every step, like the house itself was groaning under the weight of secrets it had kept for too long. Inside, the air was heavy with silence, punctuated only by the occasional snap of the fire in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the cracked walls. Damien sat in the far corner, his back against the wall, his eyes focused on nothing. His jaw was clenched, his body tight, like he was holding himself together with sheer force of will. He had fought the pack once, he had broken free, but the chains that bound him, those invisible chains, made of blood and tradition, still had a way of pulling him back, dragging him through every dark corner of his mind. He hadn't spoken much since they'd reached the cabin. Elena was nearby, sitting by the fire, her eyes far away, lost in the same kind of quiet turmoil that had taken over him. Neither of them spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because words weren't enough. Not any more. Damien's mind flicked back to the pack, the cold, unyielding force of it, the hierarchy, the rules, the constant pressure to conform. It had been a life of rituals, of blood, of power. He had once been a part of it, once believed that it was the only way to live. But now, the thought of it made his stomach turn. Every moment of kindness now feels like a betrayal to the savage life I once knew. But can I ever truly return to that darkness? He thought of the rituals, the brutal initiation rites, the tests of strength and loyalty that had stripped away the humanity of everyone involved. He had passed them all. He had been one of them, one of the wolves who followed the rules without question, without hesitation. But then, one moment, one choice, had ripped him out of that world, had thrown him into the wilderness, alone and broken. The fire crackled again, the warmth a stark contrast to the coldness inside him. He could feel Eleanor's presence at the other side of the room, the quiet tension in her every movement. She wasn't speaking either. But her silence wasn't the same as his. It wasn't the silence of someone caught between worlds. It was the silence of someone trying to keep the beast inside from clawing its way free. She was fighting it, fighting herself, and every second that passed, every moment of peace they tried to steal from this cursed existence, was a moment where the tension between them both grew. I'm caught between worlds, human and beast, hope and despair. What future lies ahead if this curse never lifts?" Eleanor's thoughts drifted in the air like smoke, tangled in with the thoughts that kept slipping through Damien's mind. She wasn't wrong. Her curse was eating at her, piece by piece, and the weight of it was something neither of them could ignore. Suddenly there was a knock at the door, soft but insistent. The sound was almost a relief, a distraction from the heaviness that had settled over them both. Damien tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his side, but he didn't draw it. The knock wasn't threatening, it was a signal. Someone was here. And he knew exactly who it was. He opened the door slowly, and there stood the figure of a man, half in shadow, half in the moonlight. His face was familiar, too familiar, and for a moment Damien felt a cold knot tighten in his chest. The man stepped inside without a word. He was from Damien's past, a rebel from the pack, one who had once been a brother in arms, but now he was a reminder of the cost of leaving, the cost of breaking the rules. The rebel's eyes flicked to Elena and then back to Damien. There was something tormented in his gaze, something that told Damien this man had his own demons, his own scar. But there was no time for that, not now. "Damien," the rebel said, his voice low and rough like he hadn't spoken in days. "The pack's not far behind. They'll be here by dawn. And they won't stop until they have you, both of you." Damien didn't need to hear any more. He could feel it. The pack was coming, just as it always did when they realized someone had strayed. The pack never let you leave, not completely. There was always someone hunting, always someone waiting for you to slip, for you to make a mistake. "I know," Damien said, his voice flat, emotionless. He wasn't afraid, not of them. But there was something deeper, something he couldn't escape. The rebel knew it too. They both knew the cost of what was coming. The moon hung high, casting its cold light over the clearing, and the tension in the air was palpable, like a storm about to break. The rebel had left after passing on his warning, and Damien stood at the edge of the cabin staring out into the woods. The silence had returned, but this time it felt heavier. The night was closing in, and with it the threat of the rival pack. Damien's eyes narrowed, his fists clenched at his sides. His thoughts were louder now, more urgent. "I can't let the past dictate our future. I must fight not just for her, but for the man I long to become." The weight of his past had always been there, a shadow that clung to him no matter how far he ran, but now it felt like a chain, one that had caught him once again. He glanced back at Elena, her form a silhouette against the firelight, the faint tremor in her shoulders a reminder of the battle she faced. She was more than just the curse that had bound her. She was a woman, a fighter. And she deserved a chance to be free. They both did. Elena's gaze met his, and for a moment everything around them disappeared. It was just the two of them, the fire between them, the weight of everything that had come before them. There was no way out of this, no way to run. But there was one thing Damien knew for certain. He wasn't going to let them take her. He wasn't going to let the past define her, or him. "We fight," Damien said, his voice low, resolved. "We fight for this, for now, for us." Elena didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She was with him. She had to be, because this was their only chance. The storm was coming, but for the first time they were ready to face it together. The lair of the rival pack was nothing more than a hollowed-out cave beneath the earth, a place of shadows and cold stone, lit only by the flickering flames of torches that barely made a dent in the suffocating darkness. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, blood, and the musk of untamed wolves, wild, savage, and raw. It was a place where the rules of civility didn't apply, where power reigned supreme and the weak were consumed without a second thought. Damien moved through the shadows with the grace of a ghost, his body tense, every muscle coiled in preparation. The plan had been simple enough. Slip into the heart of their den, find Elena, and get out before they even realized they'd been touched. But now, standing in the heart of the pack's lair, something felt wrong. His instincts screamed at him, telling him they were walking straight into a trap. But it was too late for second thoughts. Elena needed him. She was deeper in the lair, somewhere he could feel, even now, as if the bond between them had grown stronger, more desperate. He couldn't leave her behind, not again. Not after everything they had been through. He heard the first movement, a soft shuffle, a breath, a step in the shadows. He spun, drawing his knife, ready for the fight that was bound to come. But it was too late. The wolves were everywhere. They'd known. They had been waiting. A low growl broke the silence as several of the rival pack's wolves emerged from the dark, their eyes glowing, their teeth bared. The air thickened with their presence, each movement calculated, too sure of their power. The chaos erupted quickly, all at once, a flurry of claws, snarls, and snapping jaws as Damien fought back with everything he had. But he wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't prepared for the flood of memories that came with each blow, each struggle, each animalistic shift within him that was almost too familiar. He had been one of them once. He had fought in the name of the pack. But now all he could think of was Eleanor, was her safety. Through the melee he saw her. She was there at the far end of the cavern, struggling against two wolves that had her pinned. Her face was wild with desperation, the transformation barely contained within her. She was fighting, but the pack was closing in, too many, too fast. The moment he moved toward her, a figure lunged from the shadows, a blur of teeth and claws that knocked him off his feet, sending his knife skittering across the stone floor. He struggled to stand, his body aching with the effort, but he was too late. Another wolf had already reached Elena, and before he could get to her, they'd grabbed her, pulling her away from him. Her gaze locked with his as they dragged her backward into the darkness, her eyes wide with terror and something else. Something that broke him in ways he couldn't put into words. A sharp cry escaped her as they pulled her away, her silver locket catching on the edge of her neck as it broke free from its chain. The locket clattered to the ground, the silver gleaming briefly in the torchlight before it hit the stone floor with a hollow sound that seemed to echo in the cavernous space. I failed her. Every choice, every moment of hesitation has led to this. The thought cut through his chest, sharp and bitter. He had promised her safety. He had promised her freedom. And now all he had done was lead them straight into the jaws of their enemies. He staggered to his feet, only to find himself surrounded by wolves, the weight of failure pressing down on him like a crushing force. There was nothing he could do, nothing but watch as they pulled Elena away, dragging her back into the shadows, where she was lost to him. He had failed her, and he had failed himself. The locket lay on the ground, a fractured symbol of their shattered hope. It was the last thing he saw before the world around him went black. The rain came in sheets, cold and relentless, a torrent that turned the forest floor into a slick, muddy mess. It fell in heavy drops, soaking through the fabric of Damien's clothes, drenching him to the bone. He didn't feel the cold, though. He didn't feel anything. He was numb. His body moved on instinct, stumbling through the rain-soaked woods, his mind too lost in darkness to guide him. Elena was gone. The wolves had taken her, dragged her back to the heart of the pack's lair, and Damien was powerless to stop it. The thought twisted in his gut, a knot that tightened with every step. He had been too late, always too late. He found himself stumbling toward the edge of the forest, away from the danger, away from the pack. But there was nowhere to run, no escape from the memories that haunted him. The cold rain mixed with the blood in his veins, the blood of someone who had walked away from everything, his pack, his family, his purpose. And now it had all come crashing down on him. In this darkness, I see the reflection of every failure, every scar etched into my soul. Am I destined to be the monster I once was? The thought was a whisper in the back of his mind, one he couldn't push away, no matter how hard he tried. He had been a part of something savage. He had embraced the darkness once, had revelled in it, and now Now it seemed that darkness had consumed everything. The monster inside him was still there, waiting, lurking just beneath the surface. He had walked away from it once, but it had followed him, waiting for the right moment to pull him back. Damien collapsed to his knees, his body shaking with the weight of everything he had lost. The rain continued to pour, drowning him in its cold embrace. He had no answers, no plan, just the echo of Elena's eyes in his mind, the look of helplessness as they tore her away from him. "I can't be the man I was," he thought, his hand pressed against the cold earth, his fingers digging into the mud. "But can I be the man she needs me to be?" There was no answer to that, no way to move forward. He was trapped in the dark. In the past he couldn't outrun. The world felt impossibly heavy, like it was closing in around him. The weight of failure pressed down on him, crushing him under its force. But as the rain soaked through him, as the world around him blurred into a sheet of grey, one thing remained clear in his mind. He couldn't give up. Not now, not while she was still out there. He would find her. He would save her. Even if it meant becoming the monster once more. The forest was quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed against your ears, a silence so thick it almost felt like a presence. The trees stood still, their branches barely moving in the slight breeze, and the rustling of the leaves was the only sound in the world. Damien sat in the centre of the clearing, his back against the trunk of a gnarled old oak, its bark rough against his skin, as if the tree itself were trying to remind him of what he had become. He hadn't slept in days, not properly. The weight of what had happened to Elena, the taste of failure still fresh on his tongue, had robbed him of any rest. His thoughts churned in a constant loop, dragging him back to places he didn't want to go, to memories he couldn't escape. "Every scar, every haunted memory has led me here." The thought repeated itself in his mind like a drumbeat. It had been his choices, his mistakes, that had brought him to this point, the point where he had failed the one person who mattered more than anything. The cold air wrapped around him, but it wasn't the chill of the night that kept him tense. It was the suffocating weight of the past pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe, hard to move. There were moments back with the pack where he had been nothing but a tool of destruction, a weapon honed for the sole purpose of power. The cruelty of those moments, of the rituals, of the bloodshed, came rushing back to him like a tide that wouldn't stop. He could still feel the sting of it all, the power, the control, the brutality. There were rare moments, though, when he had seen something different. A flicker of compassion, a soft touch, where there should have been only cruelty. The way the pack's elder had looked at him once. The rare moments when the alpha's eyes softened, when the pack's leader had whispered words of wisdom that had made him think, even for a moment, that there was more to this world than just survival, just power. But those moments had been fleeting. Just like the good he had tried to hold on to, it had disappeared, swallowed up by the darkness that had defined his life. And now, here he was alone again, surrounded by nothing but memories, guilt, and a dark, aching emptiness that couldn't be filled. But perhaps embracing this darkness is the only path to the light. The thought came unbidden, but it felt right. The wolf inside him had always been there, lurking just beneath the surface, and he had tried to fight it for so long, to keep it caged, to bury it. But maybe that was the wrong approach. Maybe, in order to save Elena, he had to embrace the very thing that had always haunted him. He closed his eyes, letting the darkness of his past wash over him. There were moments when he wished he could turn back time, when he wished he had made different choices, taken different paths. But the past was set in stone. The only thing he had now was the future, and that future depended on him making peace with what he was, with the beast that lived inside him. The rustle of the leaves shifted, pulling him from his thoughts. His eyes snapped open, but the clearing remained still, empty. The silence was deafening. He had hoped for something, anything, to break the weight of his thoughts, but there was nothing. And that was the problem. He had been living in the past for too long, clinging to regrets, to old memories that weren't worth the weight they carried. The only way forward was to stop running from himself, to stop trying to be something he wasn't. For the first time in a long while, the thought didn't scare him. It came in a flash, a vision, fleeting but unmistakable. Elena. Her face, her eyes filled with that quiet strength he had come to admire, that fragile hope she clung to even when everything around her seemed to be falling apart. She was standing in the middle of the clearing, the soft light of dawn catching her hair, her expression distant. But there was something else there, something stronger than the curse, something stronger than the beast inside her. Hope, a spark that had never gone out, even when she thought it had. Damien's breath caught in his throat, his chest tightening as he saw her in his mind. If I can conquer the beast within, maybe I can free her from the curse that imprisons her. The thought hit him with the force of a lightning strike, a realization that shook him to his core. He had spent so long fighting against the wolf, fighting against the darkness that defined him. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to fight it. Maybe he could use it. Channeled it. The wolf had always been a part of him, just like the man he was. And maybe, just maybe, by accepting it, by embracing the monster that lived within him, he could finally break the chains that bound Elena. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood up, his hands clenched into fists. The rain was still falling, but it didn't matter anymore. The storm inside him was over. He had made his choice. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding from who he was. He was going to face the pack. He was going to save Elena, no matter the cost. The sky above him seemed to darken, the storm clouds gathering. But there was something different about it now. The clouds weren't just a sign of the coming storm. They were a reminder of the storm inside him. A storm he was ready to face. Damien's jaw clenched as he turned toward the direction of the rival pack's lair, a determination settling deep in his bones. There was no turning back now. The darkness had always been there waiting. But so was the light, and for the first time he felt like he could reach for it. "It's time to end this," he thought, his voice a low whisper to the night. "For her. For us." With one last look at the empty clearing, he turned and started walking. The forest stretched out before him, but this time he didn't feel alone. This time he was ready to fight. The mystic's cottage was even more oppressive in the daylight, with its cluttered shelves and shelves of ancient texts, jars of strange herbs, and the perpetual hum of secrets trapped in the walls. The flickering light from the hearth did little to chase away the gloom that hung in the air, but there was a tangible sense of purpose in the place now. No longer just a refuge from the storm, it had become a staging ground, a place where the fractured pieces of their plan could be assembled into something larger, something capable of standing against the overwhelming tide that had come for them. Damien stood in the center of the room, his posture rigid, as he looked over the small group of allies who had gathered. They weren't much fewer than he had hoped, but every face here had a story of regret, of fighting for a cause that had slipped from their grasp. Every one of them had been touched by the pack's cruelty, whether as rebels or outcasts, and all of them had lost something. But in the midst of the loss there was something else, a thread of hope. It was fragile, as tenuous as the smoke rising from the fire, but it was there. The mystic sat in her usual corner, her eyes closed, her hands folded in her lap as if meditating on something beyond the present. Beside her, the rebel wolf from Damien's old pack stood, his arms crossed, looking more like a shadow than a man. He had been a soldier in the pack once, but his betrayal had been as quiet as it had been lethal. He wasn't a friend, not really, but he was an ally now. And that would have to be enough. "You're sure about this?" Damien's voice was rough, low. He wasn't asking for reassurance, but for confirmation. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like the stones of the mountain. The truth was they were outnumbered, outmatched, and every part of him knew that this wasn't just a fight for Elena's freedom, it was a fight for his soul. The rabble nodded, his face unreadable. "The pack doesn't forgive. They'll come for you, for her. We've seen how they operate." He stepped forward, locking eyes with Damien. "But there's more of us now. You're not alone in this." The words hung in the air, as fragile as the promise that Damien wasn't the only one who had chosen to walk away from the pack's unyielding grip. The rebel wasn't the only one who had suffered because of their choices. He had others, villagers, old allies, even a few who had once sworn loyalty to the Alpha before they had realized just what that loyalty had cost them. "There are those who have paid the price," the mystic's voice came, sharp and clear despite the frailty of her form, "and those who will still pay. But not all debts are beyond repayment. Not all bonds are irrevocable." The room fell into a heavy silence, each person considering the weight of her words. Even the rebel seemed lost in thought, his gaze drifting to the corner where the firelight flickered, casting his face in sharp contrast. One by one the others spoke up, each voice quiet but determined, each tale a mark of their own shame, their own failures. There was an older man, once a healer to the pack's wounded, who spoke of the brutality of the pack's traditions and how he had failed to protect those who had sought sanctuary. There was a young woman, once a scout, who had seen the horrors of the Alpha's wrath firsthand and had barely escaped with her life. And then there was the blacksmith, whose hands, once steady, now shook as he spoke of the sacrifices he had made for the pack's power. They all shared something more than just their regrets. They all shared the hope that something or someone could redeem them, could redeem this fractured, broken world they had been born into. Damien's mind raced as he listened to the stories, to the confessions that spilled from each of them. These were not soldiers fighting for power. These were people fighting for the one thing they had lost. A chance at redemption, a chance to atone for the choices that had led them to this point. And as he listened to them, something inside him clicked. "These scars, these lost souls, we are all in search of redemption. Tonight I choose to fight for us all." The words weren't just a promise, they were a vow to fight for them, for Elena, for the man he was struggling to become. He turned back to the group, his expression hardening as he steeled himself for what was to come. "This isn't just about Elena," he said, his voice sharp, cutting through the tension. "This is about all of us. Every one of us has paid the price, and we all need to make it right. This fight is for redemption, and no matter what happens, we don't stop until we get it." The room held its breath for a moment. Then slowly each of them nodded. The decision was made. There was no turning back now. The mystic's eyes opened slowly, her gaze settling on Damien. "You have seen the path, but the path is never easy. What you seek cannot be bought without sacrifice." Damien's gaze didn't waver. "I'm ready." The moon was a pale, unfeeling eye in the sky, hanging low over the mist-covered forest like some distant, uncaring god. The camp was alive with the quiet urgency of preparation, a muted flurry of movement in the shadows, as Damien and his ragtag group of allies worked in synchrony, like a machine that had yet to be fully tested but was braced for the worst. The mystic had gathered them. Those who had once served the pack and those who had lived on the fringe of its cruelty. And now there was no time left for hesitation. The ritual, the training, the plan had all come down to this moment. They practiced in the dead of night, the only light coming from the flickering torches that stood like silent sentinels around the camp. Damien stood near the fire, his gaze distant, lost in the rhythmic movement of his hands as he prepared the ritual tools. The symbols, the words, they were ancient, etched into his mind by those long years spent in the shadow of the pack. But now they felt different. The power of the pack had always been about dominance, about control. The power of this moment was something else, something born from unity, from sacrifice. He wasn't alone in this fight anymore. He glanced to his left, where the rebel, once an enemy, now an ally, was sharpening the blades, his movements mechanical, the clang of steel against stone loud in the night's stillness. His face was hard, the kind of hardness that came from living in the cracks between right and wrong for too long, but there was something else in his eyes, a flicker of hope, maybe, or maybe just the cold, determined resolve to do whatever it took to make sure the pack's shadow didn't stretch across the world again. Damien's thoughts wandered to Elena, to the fragile hope they had found, the brief moment of peace they had shared before everything came crashing down. He could still see her face in his mind, her eyes reflecting the light of the fire, her shoulders slumped with the weight of the curse she bore. She had fought so hard to stay human, to hold on to the small piece of herself that hadn't been swallowed by the beast. He could still remember the soft strength in her gaze, the way she looked at him with more trust than he deserved. That was the thing that kept him going, kept him from giving up. Her belief in him, in them, in what they could be. But now there was no time to dwell on the past. They had a battle to win. The ritual began in earnest, the chanting low and steady, the incantations mixing the mysticism of the old world with the humanity they fought to preserve. Damien's voice was hoarse as he recited the words, the power in them rising like a tide, a surge of energy that felt both ancient and new. The air around them crackled with energy, with possibility. They had to make it work. There was no other choice. Beside him, Elena's presence was palpable, even in the silence. Her eyes were focused on the ritual, her hands raised in the air, mirroring his own movements. There was something deeply personal in the way she participated. This wasn't just a fight for freedom. This was a fight for her very soul. Every word spoken, every symbol drawn in the dirt was a part of her transformation, part of their shared struggle. She caught his gaze for a moment, a flicker of something passing between them, the kind of look that spoke volumes in the quiet. There was no need for words, not when they both knew what was at stake. She was with him, heart and soul. The tension between them wasn't just physical, it was the kind of bond that had formed through shared pain, shared purpose, and now, in the darkness of the forest, with the weight of the world pressing down on them, that bond was something more. It was strength. It was hope. And it was the last thing standing between them and the abyss. The training came next. Each of them taking turns, practicing with weapons, honing the skills they would need in the coming fight. The blacksmith was leading the way, showing the others how to wield the swords and axes they would use, their weight feeling heavier with every passing moment. The rebel showed them how to fight in the shadows, how to move like ghosts through the trees, quiet and deadly. Every moment was an exercise in precision, an exercise in survival. Damien was no stranger to battle. He had fought in countless skirmishes, countless wars of wills, but this fight, it felt different. It was more than just a fight for survival. It was a fight for redemption, for Elena, for everything that had been lost, and everything that could still be won. His sword felt heavier in his hand than it ever had before, the weight of the blade a reminder of everything he was willing to risk. Every strike was a prayer. Every slash through the air was a promise. "Keep your guard up," the rebel said, his voice cutting through the air like the blade in his hand. "We're not just fighting wolves. We're fighting an idea." Damien nodded, sweat trickling down the side of his face. He didn't need reminding. He understood exactly what they were up against. The pack wasn't just a force of nature. It was a tradition, a way of life, that had thrived on cruelty and domination. Breaking it would require more than just strength. It would require breaking something much deeper. And then there was Eleanor. She wasn't training with them in the same way. She was sitting on a nearby log, her eyes closed, her hands resting in her lap. She wasn't idle. No, she was preparing in her own way, calling on every ounce of will she had to keep the wolf at bay, to keep herself from tearing them all apart. The curse she bore was a constant battle, a war inside her mind and soul, but there was something different in the way she held herself tonight. Something stronger, more determined. When the ritual and training ended, they gathered by the fire, and for the first time there was a sense of unity in the air, not just among Damien and his closest allies, but among everyone present. The fight they had ahead wasn't just his, it was theirs. It was the villages, the packs, the outcasts' fight too. Every person in that circle had their own story, their own reason for wanting change. Damien looked around at them, his gaze locking with each face. They weren't just his allies anymore, they were his comrades, his family. And as the fire crackled in the center of the circle, Damien realized something. They weren't just fighting to win, they were fighting to change the world. Together. Chapter 5. The Battle for Redemption. The storm broke as they neared the lair, furious, unstoppable, as if the heavens themselves had chosen sides. The wind screamed, tearing through the trees with a force that rattled even the strongest branches. The rain lashed against their skin like the sting of an old wound, but they kept moving, pressing forward. The path up the hillside was rocky, treacherous, the jagged stones slick with water. Every step felt like a march toward fate. The lair was a hulking mass of stone, carved deep into the hillside like the bones of a long-forgotten beast. It loomed ahead of them, its jagged edges illuminated by the flicker of lightning that cut through the night. It was a place made for war, built to withstand the force of generations of wolves who had fought for power and control. Tonight, it would break. Damien led the charge, his body taut with purpose, his every step a promise of something irrevocable. His allies followed close behind, the sound of their boots hitting the wet earth muted by the pounding storm, their weapons glinting in the flashes of lightning. They had come to reclaim what had been stolen, to take back Elena, and to destroy the pack that had once been his. He could feel the tension rising in his chest. The weight of the plan, the force of their combined will, but also something darker. The pack knew they were coming, they had to know, and if they didn't, if they hadn't prepared, the battle that awaited them would be even bloodier than Damien had anticipated. He moved without thinking, the instinct to lead, to strike first, to claim control of the situation driving every action. His mind flicked to Elena, to the last time he had seen her, the way her eyes had pleaded with him to save her. The way her eyes had pleaded with him to save her. That image fueled him, pushing aside the fear, the doubt, and the old ghosts that had haunted him for so long. Every strike, every howl is a step toward reclaiming my soul. I fight not just with claws and fangs, but with the hope of a better future. The thought thrummed in his veins, the promise of a life that could be different, one where redemption was still possible, and with each step toward the lair he grew more certain of that belief. The first howl ripped through the air, sharp, bone-chilling, and full of rage. The pack had been waiting. The wolves poured from the lair like water from a broken dam, their bodies half-shifted, their eyes glowing with predatory hunger. Damien was the first to meet them, his knife flashing in the dark, cutting through the air with deadly precision. The clash of fangs and steel filled the night as the first wave of attackers surged forward. The battle was brutal. Every movement a flurry of savage instinct, every swing a test of survival. Allies fought beside him, each one with their own style, their own history of combat. The blacksmith swung his massive hammer with terrifying force, each blow landing like a thunderstrike. The rebel from the pack was swift and deadly, his blade dancing through the air with practiced ease. The mystic, though far from a fighter, had her own role to play, whispering incantations that cut through the chaos with a force all their own. But Damien barely noticed them. His focus was singular. His eyes were locked on the lair, on the dark silhouette of the wolves who had taken her. Every strike he landed, every movement he made, was to push forward, to move closer to the place where Elena waited. The storm seemed to match the battle, intense, chaotic, and unrelenting. The wolves were fierce, their attacks calculated and brutal, but there was something different now. Something that had changed in Damien since the first time he had fought them. This wasn't about survival, this wasn't about escaping the shadows, this was about redemption. About breaking the chains that had bound him for so long. He pushed through the line of wolves, his heart pounding in his chest, his every muscle screaming for release. But there was no stopping now, no turning back. The heart of the lair was as cold as the storm outside, the walls slick with dampness, the air thick with the scent of blood and sweat. The torches flickered like dying embers, casting their weak light across the chamber, illuminating the ancient symbols that had been carved into the stone. These were the signs of the old pack, the ones that bound the wolves to their cursed tradition, the ones that had stolen Eleanor's freedom. And now they would break. Damien burst into the chamber, his breath ragged, his body soaked in blood, his own, the pack's. His eyes locked on Elena, who stood in the centre, her hands bound to an altar-like stone, her head bowed. She was still, too still. The transformation was pulling at her, twisting her from within, the wolf barely contained. But there was something else, too, something that still lingered in her eyes, the flicker of hope, the faintest trace of recognition when she saw him. "Elena," Damien breathed, his voice rough, breaking through the chaos in his mind. "I'm here. I won't leave you." Her gaze flickered to him, but the wolf inside her snarled, the darkness in her eyes flickering like a flame caught in the wind. She was still fighting, still clinging to the humanity inside her, but the curse... damn it, the curse had hold of her. It was stronger than anything she had faced before. Damien's chest tightened as he reached out for her, but the rival pack was already moving, the alpha standing at the far end of the room, watching them with cold, calculating eyes. The alpha's voice was a low growl, a warning. "You think you can just waltz in and take her back?" he sneered. "She is ours. She belongs to the pack." Damien's jaw tightened. Not anymore. With a roar, the alpha lunged, but Damien was faster. The fight was brutal, the clash of fists and claws, the battle of wills as much as it was of strength. Every strike, every move was a desperate attempt to reach Elena, to pull her from the depths of the curse that threatened to consume her. In the midst of the chaos, Damien reached for the relics, the ancient symbols, the blood-soaked rituals that had been passed down through the wolves for generations. The mystic's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of the power he needed. His blood, his essence, mixed with the magic of the old world. The ritual would bind him to her, would cleanse her, but at a cost. He pressed his hand to the symbols, his blood spilling onto the stones, his own life force merging with the ancient magic. The air around them pulsed with energy, the walls seeming to vibrate as the ritual took shape, the magic flowing through them both. Eleanor's breath hitched, her body jerking as the transformation waged war inside her. She was fighting, but Damien could feel it, could feel the pull of the ritual, the call to something larger than either of them. He was with her. He was part of this now. "I sacrifice every part of me if it means freeing her from this curse," the thought came, sharp and clear. His body burned with the intensity of the magic, the raw, unrelenting power of the ritual coursing through him, through them both. As the storm raged outside, the final incantation rang through the chamber, a shout of desperation, of love, of sacrifice. The light around them flared, bright as 1,000 suns, and then silence. The world seemed to hold its breath as the last of the storm passed, as the ritual reached its climax. The symbols on the stone pulsed once more, then faded into the ether, leaving only the stillness behind. Damien fell to his knees, his body shaking, his heart pounding in his chest. Elena's body collapsed, her chains shattered, the curse lifted. She was free! They were free. The lair had fallen silent, and in that silence Damien could hear the last breath of the storm, the last echo of the battle that had almost destroyed them both. And yet, as he reached for Eleanor, their hands touched, and he knew this was only the beginning. The battlefield lay still in the heavy silence of the storm's end, the storm's fury spent, its echoes fading like the last breath of a dying beast. The landscape was scarred, the earth turned over in places, the ground slick with blood, some of it wolf, some of it human, and all of it a testament to the night's violence. The air was damp, thick with the smell of rain-soaked earth, but the sky was clearing, the first hints of dawn breaking through the black clouds like a promise. Damien stood amidst the ruins, his breath heavy in his chest as the adrenaline of the battle began to subside. His body ached from the wounds, the bruises, the scratches that lined his skin, but there was no pain worse than what he had already endured. The battle had been brutal, a violent clash of wills and strength, but it had been necessary. The enemy lay defeated around him, their blood mixing with the earth, and the pack that had once been his, broken, scattered. In the distance, survivors began to emerge from the smoke and the debris, figures that were more than just allies in the fight. Some were wolves, their forms still half-shifted, but with the violence spent, their claws retracting, their rage subsiding. Others were human, reluctant helpers who had been drawn into this war, caught up in the mess of a world they never asked for. They moved cautiously, eyes darting around the battlefield, wary of the stillness. Damon's eyes swept over them, the faces of those who had stood with him, who had fought alongside him, each scar they carried now a permanent reminder of the price of victory. There had been losses on both sides, too many to count, but the ones who remained, the ones who survived, were here now, and with them a new beginning was possible. In the silence of dawn, every scar is a testament to a battle fought for love and redemption. The thought lingered in his mind, heavy and true. He had fought for more than just freedom, more than just survival. He had fought for the chance to rebuild, to be something more than the monster he had once been. The wind began to pick up, pushing away the last remnants of the storm. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the broken clouds, casting the landscape in a soft golden light. The world was waking up, different, changed, and for the first time Damien allowed himself to believe in the possibility of that change. He turned, his eyes seeking the one person who had made this all worth it, Elena. The clearing was bathed in the soft, gentle light of the rising sun, the world alive in its tender glow. The air felt different here, more alive, less heavy with the weight of the past. It was a new beginning, a fresh chapter, and it felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Elena stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes closed for a moment as she breathed in the cool, fresh air. The battle was over. The curse that had bound her was gone, and in its place was something she had only dared to hope for. Freedom, the kind of freedom that came not from the absence of chains, but from the ability to choose, to be more than just a prisoner of the beast inside her. She opened her eyes, and the first thing she saw was Damien, standing a few feet away, his form still battered from the battle, but his eyes were full of something she couldn't describe. Something soft, something strong, something that mirrored what she felt. Their gazes locked, and for a moment neither of them moved. There were no words, no need for them. The silence between them was filled with everything they had fought for, everything they had lost, and everything they had gained. Elena took a step forward, her body moving toward him, as if drawn by some invisible force. The air between them hummed, a quiet vibration that spoke of a bond that could never be broken, not even by the darkness that had once torn them apart. She reached him, and without a word, without a second thought, he pulled her into his arms. Her breath hitched as she pressed against him, her body finding its place in the strength of his embrace. They fit together perfectly, as though they had always been meant to stand like this. Together, whole. The world around them seemed to fade, the sunlight wrapping them in warmth as if the earth itself was bearing witness to this moment. Damien's voice was soft, almost a whisper against her ear. "You're free." Elena closed her eyes, her heart hammering in her chest. "I've always been free, Damien. You were the one who couldn't see it." His hand gently cupped her face, lifting her chin so their eyes could meet once more. There was something in his gaze, something she couldn't quite name. It was understanding, it was acceptance, it was love. The kind of love that had been forged through fire, through sacrifice, and through the very darkness they had both emerged from. "I have shed the shadow of my past," Damien said, his voice rough but steady, "and in your eyes I find the light to guide us forward." Eleanor's heart swelled in her chest as she gazed up at him, the man who had fought for her, for them both, the man who had seen beyond the curse, beyond the wolf, to the person she had always been. "Together, we are more than our curses. We are our own salvation." The thought echoed through her, a truth she had never fully understood until now. They stood in the clearing, the world around them silent but alive, as if waiting for something to begin. Their journey wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time, it didn't feel like they were walking through the dark. They had come through the storm, and in each other's arms they had found their way back to the light. As the sun rose higher, bathing them in its warmth, Damien and Elena stood together. Their battle had been fought, their redemption had begun, and the future, whatever it held, was theirs. The end.